This is an NBC Charlotte special report.
This spill, this gray water, this mess at the Dan River changed the landscape in North Carolina. Millions of gallons of coal ash spilling out of these dumps into the water.
I've never believed they're safe, and I definitely don't believe that they're safe now.
But that dump is half the size of this one, right by the lake that 1 million people around Charlotte depend on for their drinking water.
What do we want? Clean water!
So the stakes here are huge.
We demand that you stop poisoning our water!
Yeah!
Why is this dump right by the lake? Why isn't Duke Energy moving it?
With respect to coal ash, we have no reason to believe anything Duke Energy tells us.
The challenge made a governor defensive.
Excuse me, sir, but you have not been recognized.
And put a multi-billion-dollar corporation on notice with the feds asking, should someone go to prison? Who's really looking out for your drinking water? Right now on a special edition of FlashPOINT.
wcnc-tv Charlotte. This is FlashPOINT, where power and politics collide and the tough questions get asked and answered. Now, this week's host, Stuart Watson.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Stuart Watson, and this is the River Bend Steam Station. Behind it, 2 massive coal ash ponds. Behind that, Mountain Island Lake, the sole source of drinking water for almost 900,000 of us in Charlotte and Gaston County. River Bend is closed now. It no longer burns coal to make electricity, but it's left behind tons and tons of coal ash, sprayed with water and dumped in ponds. Those ponds are twice the size of the ponds that spilled into the Dan River. The coal ash is held back by earthen dams, but those dams have broken before. In 2011, a coal ash pond at a power plant near Milwaukee broke, sending equipment and ash into Lake Michigan. And in 2008, when the coal ash pond next to a power plant in Tennessee burst, the flood destroyed or damaged 40 homes and put more than 1 billion gallons of ash into the river there. Duke insists that could not happen here, but environmentalists point out they said the same thing about the Dan River site, and there's a lot more at stake here.
We're a lot closer, we've got a lot more ash, and we've got a lot more people to be impacted by that.
The NBC Charlotte I-Team has been covering the issue of coal ash, and River Bend in particular, for years now. But now that there's been an actual spill in North Carolina, we're going to take a half hour and ask a couple of critical questions. What should be done about the coal ash ponds here, and who's looking out for our drinking water? A security guard saw it first Sunday, February 2nd. The water level in the coal ash pond at Dan River was dropping. A day later, Duke told the public there'd been a spill. Tens of thousands of tons of coal ash turned the Dan River gray. It took Duke 5 days to plug the leak. A corrugated metal stormwater pipe, decades old and buried dozens of feet under the coal ash, had broken, and the coal ash flooded the river.
Coal ash failures are going to happen. Other kind of failures are happening. It's inevitable with this type of design of ash ponds.
Duke was quick to say it knew of no other similar stormwater pipes at any of its 30 other coal ash ponds around the state. But the coal ash ponds have hardly been foolproof, and for years Duke has made confident assurances that the coal ash ponds were safe.
We will certainly make sure that we have very high water quality and groundwater protection at the same time that we're able to perform that process as cost effectively as we can for our customers.
After the cleanup, attention quickly turned to other coal ash dumps, most notably River Bend because it sits on Mountain Island Lake, and because that lake provides drinking water to 4 cities: Charlotte, Belmont, Mount Holly, and Gastonia.
If that dam were to break and spill into the river, it would be completely uncontrollable.
The water intakes on Mountain Island Lake are closer to the River Bend coal dump than the water intakes on the Dan River, where treatment plants filtered out the coal ash and did not have to turn to bottled water.
It is unthinkable to store that much toxic substance in an unlined hole held back by an earthen dike next to the water reservoir for one of the major metropolitan areas of the United States.
The Catawba Riverkeeper and the Southern Environmental Law Center are suing Duke Energy over River Bend and other coal ash dumps. asking the power company to dry out the ponds, dig up the coal ash, and truck it to lined landfills that will not leak.
It's not cutting-edge technology. It's just basic common sense.
After a similar lawsuit in South Carolina, SCE&G settled, dried out its coal ash ponds, and is digging up the coal ash and trucking it elsewhere so it will not spill into the watery river.
Why do the people of North Carolina and the waters of North Carolina get less protection than the people of South Carolina?
Duke has balked at making a similar move, saying it wants to study the issue.
We don't act hastily. We base all of our decisions on science and engineering. That's the kind of business that we run.
And Duke has said that while it will pay for the Dan River cleanup, any removal of coal ash ponds could cost the ratepayers.
As you know, our customers pay our cost of operation, but it'll be the North Carolina Utilities Commission who decides how those costs, and if those costs, go to the customer.
The day after a hearing before state lawmakers, Duke announced a profit of $3 billion. Environmentalists say Duke should use some of those billions in profits to move the coal ash.
Duke, clean up your own mess!
But the state's top regulator, Secretary John Scavarla of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, first sided with Duke, saying coal ash removal required more study.
Their only acceptable remedy was dig them up, move them to lined landfills, and cover them. We're talking 14 facilities and 32 coal ash ponds. I can assure you it's not that simple. There's a lot of science that has to go into making those kind of determinations. There are environmental scientists who say that is the worst thing that could happen to the environment.
But this week, Governor Pat McCrory, himself a longtime Duke employee, wrote an urgent letter to Duke with Secretary Scavarla co-signing, saying we will not stand by while coal ash ponds remain a danger due to their proximity to the drinking water.
It's time for them to step up to the plate and take some action. Show not only me their plans, but the public their plans, first at Dan River and second at the other plants throughout North Carolina.
The coal ash spill puts our governor, Pat McCrory, in a tough political position because of his long-standing ties to Duke Energy and because a federal grand jury has launched a criminal investigation. We'll have more on that in a moment after we pause for your forecast from John Wendell in the First Warren Storm Center. We're back at the Riverbend Steam Station on Mountain Island Lake, the sole source of drinking water for most of us in the Charlotte area. And we're talking about the recent coal ash spill on the Dan River and its political fallout. The spill really put Governor Pat McCrory in a bind because McCrory worked for Duke Energy for 28 years. Duke and its executives were some of his leading campaign contributors, and because McCrory still holds an undisclosed amount of Duke's stock. But when reporters pressed him on the exact amount, he quickly got defensive. After the Dan River coal ash spill, Governor Pat McCrory visited the scene and called on his former employer to clean it up.
We've asked Duke, and they've agreed to this, to spare no expense in ensuring that they stop this leak and secure this ash pond, both now and for the future.
But when AP reporters asked McCrory in a news conference whether he had intervened on behalf of Duke in lawsuits over coal ash, McCrory denied involvement and referred questions to his Environment Secretary, John Scavarla.
My emphasis is right here on the storm. I'd be glad to have you talk to Secretary Scavarla regarding that, but I have had no conversations with Duke Energy about the lawsuits or about the federal action.
But when the questions kept coming from AP reporters, McCrory talked over them and shut them down.
I didn't, excuse me, sir, but you have not been recognized, okay? And I'd be glad to take any other, sir, excuse me, sir. I told you I'd get John Scavarla back with you, and we'd be glad to answer your questions, but it's no time to be disrespectful.
McCrory has always been prickly about his personal income and holdings, going all the way back to the campaign.
If you just go to the elections board right now, you know, and I ask all the reporters, it tells exactly who has paid me for the past year. It shows my stocks. It shows everything.
Doesn't show
It shows
how
my
much.
employers. It doesn't show how much, and frankly, I don't think that's your business, Stuart.
McCrory still owns over $10,000 in Duke stock, but he won't say exactly how much. Some environmentalists see this as a blatant conflict of interest. Attorney Frank Holloman at the Southern Environmental Law Center says McCrory is uniquely positioned to bring together state regulators and Duke to fix the coal ash dumps.
He appoints the head of Diener, and he worked for a long time for Duke Energy, and Duke Energy worked hard to elect him governor.
Democracy North Carolina, a campaign finance group, reported that as the coal ash controversy intensified last year, Duke gave another $437,000 to help GOP causes. But Duke has a track record of betting on winners, irrespective of political party, guaranteeing a $10 million line of credit to the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte that nominated Barack Obama for re-election. Inside North Carolina, the governor and his political party, the GOP, have more to lose from this coal ash spill, and here's why. A federal grand jury in Raleigh has issued 2 sets of subpoenas, one to Diener, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and the other to Duke. That means the feds want to know if someone should go to prison. A letter from the U.S. Attorney says they've launched, quote, an official criminal investigation of a suspected felony. First, the federal grand jury subpoenaed records from Duke and from state regulators at Diener. Then they issued new subpoenas ordering more than a dozen state employees to testify, asking them whether anything of value changed hands between them and Duke Energy.
It's not just the company or organization that is at risk, it's the people or officers or managers who work there who are at risk too.
So far, nearly 24 federal subpoenas have been issued, but there's one group of people who have not been subpoenaed.
Have you been served a subpoena or anyone in your office?
No, I've not been served a subpoena, and no one that I have appointed or no one in my office has been served a subpoena.
At a news conference last week, Diener Secretary John Skvarla said he'd have no comment on the subpoenas. Now, the coal ash ponds here at Riverbend behind me are seeping into Mountain Island Lake. In a moment, we'll talk to a scientist who's tested that water and see what his findings mean for our drinking water supply as FlashPOINT continues. We're back at the Riverbend Steam Station wrestling with the environmental question of what to do with coal ash after a recent spill on the Dan River. It might be helpful at this point to just take a minute and talk about how we got here and where all this coal ash comes from. Duke brings coal by the trainload down to North Carolina from places like West Virginia. It burns that coal in steam stations. The burning coal heats water. That's why Duke built coal-fired plants by rivers and lakes, lots of water. And the water becomes steam. Most of what you see coming out of smokestacks is not smoke, it's steam. The steam is turning giant turbines inside, and the turbines generate our electricity. You plug in your computer or your cell phone, you're connecting to coal. And after the coal is burned, what's left is ash. At newer plants, that ash is dry and trucked out to lined landfills, but at the older plants, Duke sprayed the ash with water so it became a kind of sludge. And Duke dumped that coal ash sludge in unlined ponds right by the water at places like Riverbend.
In the 1950s, the goal was to get the ash out of the air. It was a solution to that problem, and it's what humans do. We bury our trash and try to forget about it. But 60 years later, you know, it's just outdated technology, really.
Now, we followed water samples taken from the lake behind these coal ash dumps to a sophisticated lab at Duke University to talk to the scientists there about what his findings mean for our drinking water supply.
I'm going to take y'all straight to the ash ponds.
Sam Perkins tests the water quality on Mountain Island Lake, the sole source of drinking water for most of Charlotte.
This is one of the seepages right here. That's not coming out of the permitted discharge.
Water from the coal ash ponds is seeping through an earthen dam about 80 feet high beside the Riverbend Steam Station.
This is one of multiple points around the perimeter where the coal ash pond behind that berm is leaking through groundwater and coming out right here.
In that water, pollutants like arsenic at many times the EPA limits for drinking water.
Arsenic is a carcinogen. It can also cause skin irritation and a number of other issues.
150 miles east at Duke University, researchers use sophisticated equipment to track arsenic.
This is the source when we put the water sample.
Geochemist Avner Vingosh used this mass spectrometer to find a kind of fingerprint, tracing the arsenic in the lake to the arsenic from the coal ash.
In addition, we can tell this is coming from coal ash and not coming from other source, stormwater, wastewater, or other potential source of contamination.
Dr. Vingosh tested the so-called effluent, that's the stream rushing out of the outfall at the coal ash ponds.
What we found that the effluent, the outfall, contains high level of arsenic.
By the time the runoff reaches Charlotte's water intake about 3 miles downstream, it's, well, watered down. How worried should you be?
Well, that's a tough one. I think for drinking water, our data showing has not reached to the level of concern.
But Vingosh says under extreme conditions like a drought, the arsenic in the muck outside the water intake could erupt into the raw water supply.
The way I would describe it, we're living kind of next to a volcano. It could erupt any time. Right now we are in good shape.
CMUD treats the raw water before we drink it at giant water treatment plants like this one on Highway 16. And the utility can take out the arsenic, but it'll cost you.
Expensive, yes. I think the notion that coal is cheap is not true.
Duke Energy has done its own testing of the water coming from the coal ash ponds.
We are required to do routine monitoring. I can see it done every day. The water quality's been good, continues to be good.
Even if you can't find the toxic substance in the water at a particular time in the water column, it's heavy metals. They sink. It's gathering in the sediment.
And if you look back through satellite photos on Google Earth, you'll see Duke has already dug some coal ash out of Riverbend when the ponds filled up in 2006 and 2007.
It's something they've done before. We're asking them to go deeper and remove a little bit more of it.
If they determine that excavation is the best option to protect the water quality, then that's what we'll do.
But environmentalists want the leaking to stop now, and they know it'll take years to dig out all that ash.
We realize it cannot be done overnight.
So they're again turning to the courts, just like they did in South Carolina, this time to prod Duke to clean up its act. And it's not just the courts.
What do we want? Clean water!
Some protesters are taking to the streets. Why the issue of coal ash is not just for so-called tree huggers anymore, when FlashPOINT concludes. We have a catchphrase for people who care about coal ash and drinking water. We call them tree huggers. But you let someone spill tons of coal ash into your drinking water supply, a lot more of us look a lot like a tree hugger. NBC Charlotte has followed one family who lives in this community for years who knew about coal ash before any of their neighbors.
I have pet turtles that I get from here.
Anna Binky, her friend Maddie, Mom Sarah, and Dad Dave all live on Mountain Island Lake. And Mountain Island Lake lives next to the Riverbend steam station.
I can see it from my bedroom window.
Anna wakeboards here, paddles here, skis here.
We swim here, and it's just, we can't swim in a dump.
So when it came time for her 6th grade science project, Anna and her friend Maddie decided to test the water for arsenic.
Because it's our drinking water and it's right beside where I live.
It's not just Anna's drinking water. Charlotte, Gastonia, Mount Holly, Belmont all draw most of their drinking water through intakes, like giant straws slurping the water out of Mountain Island Lake.
All right, I need everybody to sit down.
Anna's school is named for the lake, Mountain Island Charter.
We tested the arsenic levels closer and higher to the Riverbend power plant, which is just down the road.
And even though many of these students pass by the Riverbend plant on the way to school, Anna says most people don't think about it.
The ash ponds in Mountain Island Lake are not lined and drain into the lake, which is our drinking water.
Since there's no lining, no barrier, the coal ash ponds seep into the lake through the ground. And they gush directly into the lake through a stream called an outfall. At the outfall, Anna and her partners found arsenic at levels 20 times the EPA limit for drinking water.
This is what comes out of those ash ponds.
My name is Anna Binky.
The year before, Anna complained straight to Duke's CEO, Jim Rogers.
I don't want to drink ashes from coal. That's gross.
We caught up with Anna after having chicken fingers with her mom at the Midnight Diner.
What did you basically want Mr. Rogers to know?
I just wanted to ask him when or if he will close down the plant, and was just stating why.
I think I'm an environmentalist at heart. Our position on a lot of environmental issues reflect that. So I want to get it right, because part of my legacy is getting it right.
And sure enough, as Jim Rogers retired, Duke retired Riverbend, 2 years ahead of schedule. But the problem of the coal ash remained.
I'm Sarah Benke. I live on Mountain Island Lake, right near this coal plant, Riverbend.
The Benkes started protesting the coal plant because Anna's mom, Sarah, got cancer.
I am a mom. I am a cancer survivor. I am concerned about my health.
But Sarah wasn't always a protester.
Hello.
This suburban mom began organizing her neighbors.
So I'm just really excited that you guys all came and that you're all concerned about this too.
Holding meetings in her home
Enough is enough.
and taking to the streets to alert the public there could be more than coal ash dumped in those ponds.
They can put boiler slag, they can put cleaning solvents, they can put sewage, they can put lab waste in here. We have no idea what is truly lurking in these ash ponds. They're just big pits in the ground that they've been dumping stuff in for half a century.
CMUD, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Utilities District, regularly tests the drinking water for contaminants.
Copper, zinc, arsenic.
So far, they haven't spotted any. And yet, the Dan River spill was a kind of wake-up call to the public and to Duke.
And it took a disaster to get them to say that they would take a fresh look at these.
The spill was more than a scare. It's a kind of teachable moment that the issue of coal ash isn't just for tree huggers.
I get so frustrated when people say, oh, this is a bunch of environmentalists that are upset about this. This is an economic issue as well. Look at what happened in West Virginia. If people don't have clean water, it is bad for business in North Carolina.
Anna's reason for fighting coal ash is a little different than her mom's.
Let people know that kids have a voice too.
Because when it comes to the long-term cost of coal ash, it's her generation that will pay the price. Now the legislature, the governor, the public is paying a lot more attention to coal ash in drinking water. Let's hope there's a workable solution before another disaster, because safe, fresh drinking water is about as basic a human need as it gets. If you have thoughts and ideas, please share them with us through Twitter, Facebook, and by email. We've covered this issue for years, and we don't plan to stop now. Dave Wagner is back from the Winter Games in Sochi. He'll be in this spot next week. Until then, thanks for watching.
This is an NBC Charlotte special report.
Coal ash ponds next door to drinking water. Wells testing positive for a cancer-causing chemical.
If you look at my land, my well, my location to the coal ash pond, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. I mean, come on.
Neighbors worry it's already making them sick.
4 houses in a row we've had brain tumors here.
Duke Energy and the state do their own testing. Duke denies any problem.
Their water supplies are very safe.
The continuing coal ash controversy on a special edition of FlashPOINT.
wcnc-tv Charlotte. This is FlashPOINT, where power and politics collide and the tough questions get asked and answered. Now, this week's host, Stuart Watson.
Good morning and thanks for joining us. I'm Stuart Watson. We're out here on Mountain Island Lake because this is the source of most of Charlotte's drinking water. In fact, if you live in all of Mecklenburg and Gaston counties, chances are this is where your water comes from. But there's also another neighbor here, coal ash ponds, as there are in many of the lakes and streams around North Carolina. And that causes problems. So for the next half hour, we're not just going to talk about the pollution, we're also going to talk about some solutions. Coal ash is leaking into the groundwater and surface water around our state. It contains a variety of toxins, heavy metals, and cancer-causing chemicals, which can be harmful to fish, wildlife, and even humans. Charlotte is in the center of most of the coal ash in the state. 5 of the 14 coal-fired power plants are around our area, and most of the ash. Along the Catawba River, there's the Marshall Steam Station on Lake Norman, Riverbend here on Mountain Island Lake, and the Allen Station on Lake Wylie. To our west, there's the Cliffside Station on the Broad River near Shelby, and to the northeast, the Buck Station near I-85 on the Yadkin River near Salisbury. We want to begin there at Buck because this week we reported that well tests outside the Buck Steam Station found evidence of a cancer-causing agent in the well water.
I grew up on the lake, so water's important to me. Love it.
Sherry Gobble surrounds herself with water from the pond in front of her home.
The water's peaceful, yeah.
To the pond behind her home.
The trees didn't used to be dead like that.
A pond filled with coal ash from Duke Energy's Buck Steam Station. Didn't you know you were living next to a coal ash pond when you moved?
Never really thought about it. Never really thought about it, honestly. Duke has made us all feel like it's okay in this community. We've always heard that they're a good neighbor, and I trusted that. I honestly trusted that, and now I'm questioning that. Questioning because of what she discovered when the Waterkeepers Alliance tested her drinking water. She found lead. It was 19 parts per billion. The state, North Carolina state regulation is 15 parts per billion. That may not sound like much, but when you have small children, that's a great concern to me. Like all her neighbors in the Dukeville community northeast of Salisbury, Sherry's family gets their water from a well in the ground. The wellhead is right over here. If you drive down the road from Sherry's, you'll see the same fake rock over and over again in the neighbors' yards. Those fake rocks cover wellheads. Can you see the wellhead? No. That's what it looks like. The riverkeeper found something else in Sherry's water and in her neighbors, a cancer-causing chemical called hexavalent chromium. Hexavalent chromium is directly from coal ash burning. When Duke heard about Sherry's test, they started doing their own well water testing in conjunction with the State Department of Environment and Natural Resources, called DENR.
Duke Energy recently completed some neighbor-requested water sampling, and we've been able to determine with an independent lab results that we have no indication that the ash basins are influencing their water supplies. Their water supplies are very safe. Just one thing, Duke never tested Sherry's well, and they didn't test some other neighbors' wells that were close to the coal ash ponds. If you look at my land, my well, my location to the coal ash pond, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. I mean, come on. But Duke insists the water flowing underground from the unlined coal ash ponds here is all moving away from the neighbors' wells and toward the Yadkin River. We know from our groundwater monitoring results over the last several years that groundwater is heading toward the river and not uphill toward where the neighbors are. We're very pleased to see that this data validates that. Sherry's well goes down more than 100 feet. That's lower than the pond level. They're saying that everything is moving that way. And that none of this is moving this way. Well, I hope they're right, but I don't know. In all of those samples that we've collected, there are no significant exceedances of state groundwater standards. One thing to note, there is no state standard for hexavalent chromium, the cancer-causing chemical. There's a proposed drinking water standard in California, but no state standard here. Do you trust Duke? Do you trust their numbers? No. No, not right now. I feel like Duke is going to do everything they can to protect their interest. I don't feel like they are going to protect mine. Sherry will not let her kids swim in the pool this year. She won't bathe them in the house. She won't even plant a garden. I do not feel angry. I do not want to argue about it. I do want something done. So the woman who loves water is now afraid of it. Even more so when she started talking to her neighbors about cancer. Now, scientists have already studied the neighbors in the Dukeville community because of the instances of brain cancer there. But news this week of seeps that were contaminated flowing onto neighbors' property have raised new concerns.
A lot of good memories.
Ron Thomas was born on this farm in this house.
79 years I've lived here.
A house built before the Civil War. The
reason the settler picked this spot.
It was the best water.
But now the Thomases say their home and its well water are under threat.
If you look over there, you can see the water coming out.
Water seeps through the soil from the direction of a coal ash pond next door at Duke Energy's Buck Steam Plant.
Our well is just over 400 feet from the ash pond, which is a very short distance for water to travel.
An environmental group called the Waterkeepers Alliance took samples of these seeps. Lab tests found chromium, a part of coal ash, at almost 10 times the state groundwater standard.
Would you want your family and your children drinking that water? And that's what these families are faced with.
Duke and state regulators took their own samples of well water, and they tested water from the Thomases seeps. But Duke and the state found no chromium over groundwater limits.
This is welcome news for us. We were able to report back very positive results that those folks can be very confident in their water quality. We're not seeing any indication of ash basin influence in that water.
But Duke and the state did not draw their samples directly from the seeps the way the Waterkeeper did, but downstream where the sample could have been diluted.
I'm not, accusing them directly, pointing a finger, but there seems to be some differences.
The Thomases are skeptical because of their family's medical history.
There's been right much sickness in our family.
I've had kidney failure twice and a benign pituitary brain tumor. And 4 houses in a row, we've had brain tumors here.
It just doesn't make sense for this small a community to have that much problem.
Terry Butler's son died of a brain tumor before he turned 39. He lived next door to the Thomases and drank well water from an old well that's since run dry.
But you're also walking in it every day, breathing it every day. My children are very small back then. Who knows? Maybe my son got a brain tumor from that. I have no idea. I can't prove it, but it's a shame.
24 years ago, scientists studied the cancer cases around Dukeville, but focused on power lines and found no link.
They didn't check the water at that time.
Ash basins have been around for a very long time, and I am not aware of any studies nationally that are credible studies that show any conclusive link between ash basins and health and carcinogens and any concerns or health effects that have actually
That could just be because we haven't studied.
Well, you're right. I think there is an opportunity for more study.
While the Thomases and their neighbors welcome a cancer cluster study, they want two things even more. They want Duke to pay for fresh drinking water, and they want the coal ash cleaned up.
I would like to trust Duke. I'd like to think that they're a good neighbor. I just hope that they will do the right thing and get these 3 huge ash ponds out of here permanently.
There are options for getting the coal ash away from the water supply permanently, but first it's important to note that these seeps are not some kind of isolated incident, and we'll have that story right after John Wendell has your forecast in the First Warn Storm Center. Now, coal ash is leaking across the state, not just into surface waters like here at Mountain Island Lake, but also into the groundwater, underground. And recent tests of some of those leaks reveal troubling findings.
It looks like it's a pretty good sized stream.
Guy Hutchins spotted it.
Basically sinkholes that has water flow in them.
Sinkholes under a dam holding back old unlined coal ash ponds.
About 10 feet down is a major flow of water.
So NBC Charlotte photojournalist John Gray outfitted a waterproof GoPro video camera with a tiny flashlight and lowered it using a telescoping pole more than 10 feet down the hole. Not a gush, but a steady flow of water running under Guy's property.
The water actually goes underneath this road and comes out down there next to the river.
The Broad River on the Cleveland-Rutherford County line, just downstream of Duke Energy's Cliffside coal plant. A neighbor gave us a lift upstream where you can clearly see the big outfall from Duke's coal ash pond. Duke has a permit for this, but back up the riverbank,
that's the berm off the ash pond right behind us there.
Leaks, seepage, flowing through the earthen dam called a berm, holding back all that coal ash.
The seepage is basically just at the base of this berm, and some of it's coming, looks like it's leaching from the berm.
So riverkeeper Hartwell Carson from Asheville sampled the water.
That didn't actually come up high in metals. I think there was a lot of fresh water mixing with any pollution that was there.
But upstream, near some old buried coal ash ponds, he took more samples, and bingo.
There was a lot of flow, and there was a lot of toxicity in that flow.
Carson found pipes sticking out of the riverbank below the earthen dam.
It was 25 times the drinking water standard for arsenic.
Carson mapped his sample sites on Google Earth. The site with the highest arsenic levels were here, just below the spillway near a dried-out coal ash pond.
Just in of itself, discharging any pollution without a permit is against the law. It's against federal law, the Clean Water Act.
At a tour of Cliffside last June, a company spokeswoman assured us Duke abided by all laws.
We're in compliance with ever-increasing state and federal environmental legislation and requirement.
Environmentalists say that's no longer true, even if it was in June.
I think seeps is a little misleading. It appears like maybe that's just a trickle. I wouldn't be surprised if you're seeing several 100,000 gallons a day of this pollution entering the Broad River.
Back at the Broad River, Guy Hutchins is worried about what the sinkhole and the water flowing underground will mean for his road.
Eventually, it will probably wash it out.
But he's also worried about the water quality in the Broad River, where he lives and rents out cabins at a retreat called River Mist.
When the rain actually comes over the overflow in that dam, and everything goes just right straight into the river.
So while Guy is concerned about a big gush, a spill like what happened at the Dan River, he's also worried about the steady drip, drip, drip of these smaller leaks like this newest one. There are solutions on the horizon to stop these seeps. We'll talk to the politicians and the experts about the trade-offs involved and look at what some companies are already doing when FlashPOINT continues. In the coal ash controversy, one potential solution is using the ash as fill dirt to level out land for construction. Now, Duke Energy has pitched the city of Charlotte on using up to 5 million tons of coal ash from the Riverbend station at the Charlotte Douglas Airport. Duke is already reusing coal ash as fill dirt at the Asheville Airport. Now it wants to do the same thing at the Charlotte Airport. Duke hired a company called Chiraw out of Kentucky, and Chiraw trucks the coal ash to the Asheville Airport and dumps it inside of giant liners to keep the ash from leaking into the groundwater.
But if not there, where? And that's the biggest problem with the coal ash issue, is finding a place to move it and at what cost.
Now Duke wants to move 4 million tons of coal ash from the Riverbend steam station to Charlotte Douglas Airport.
We think this project would be environmentally, scientifically, technically, and physically sound.
The Catawba Riverkeeper, an environmental group, offered a qualified endorsement.
I think they have a first-rate operation, and I've seen a lot of ash handling operations over the years. But there is going to be some dust.
But Charlotte City Council members still have more questions than answers.
Can I explain to any member of this community that this is the right thing to do, it is the right time to do it, and it's going to be done in a way that's going to keep our community safe.
But an engineer affiliated with UNC Charlotte encourages the city to remain open.
It's been done in many places, and there are studies on this that say it's actually one of the preferential fills if you have a large quantity of excess ash. It's a consistent material.
Well, God knows we have that.
Right.
As an engineer, Chris Harden has staked his license signing off on the use of what's called structural fill. That is, fill dirt that's wrapped up in a liner in other construction projects. He says the risk of using coal ash at the airport would be minimal, since there are no water wells nearby and the coal ash can be locked up.
You can't say that you've done all your due diligence in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. You have to look into it, and there really is a responsibility to work with the local utility.
But a scientist who studied coal ash says those liners can leak.
They're designed to allow a certain amount of leachate and seepage and drainage to go through.
Dennis Limley is a biologist at Wake Forest University.
I've worked with coal ash toxicity to fish and wildlife since 1978.
Dr. Limley found one element in coal ash, selenium, causes birth defects.
The variety of toxic effects is the same whether it's fish, a bird, a mammal, or a human.
He says even though airports install liners, coal ash could leak and enter the groundwater, flowing underground to wells or surface streams.
We don't have any information on the storage characteristics or the performance standards for these fills in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, most of these structural fills and even landfills are unmonitored and unregulated.
If you were talking to the aviation director at Charlotte Douglas or the city manager or the city council, and they said, "What do you think, Doc? Put coal ash out in structured fill, prop up the airport runway?" What do you think?
I would say to stay away from it, just because the risks that we see out there outweigh the benefits in terms of long-term hazard to fish and wildlife.
South Carolina has already started drying out its coal ash ponds and digging up all that ash. We flew over the Wateree plant near Columbia, where SCE&G is ahead of schedule in removing the coal ash from the waterside. And we drove to Monk's Corner near Charleston to see firsthand how another power company is making good use of coal ash. This machine is 3 kinds of green: painted green, environmental green, cash green. The green machine is nothing but 3 belts and a big screen. It shakes dirt, or in this case coal ash, and separates it into 3 big piles. One for the big clumps, one for the sticks and roots, and one for the finer ash. A front-end loader scoops up the coal ash and dumps it in a truck and hauls it to a plant that puts this coal ash to good use as cement.
For Santee Cooper, this was a win-win-win situation with the environment, the economy, and for our customers.
Santee Cooper, if you're from Charleston, you might say Cooper, is a state-run electric company in South Carolina. Environmentalists sued Santee Cooper over the coal ash at another coal plant. Santee Cooper didn't just settle that one lawsuit. It started a company-wide program at all of its coal plants to reuse the coal ash.
Nobody is forcing us to do this. It's the right thing to do.
Duke Energy reuses some of its dry coal ash as cement and other building products. The difference at Santee Cooper is that this area used to be a pond, so Santee Cooper is drying out this ash in these piles that look like giant anthills and reusing the coal ash that was once underwater.
If there were standing water in the pond, it would just take a little longer. You would have to allow the material to de-water, but it would be the same end use.
That's important because Duke Energy has dozens of these ponds, including the one that spilled into the Dan River, and ponds that are leaking into Mountain Island Lake and Lake Wylie closer to Charlotte. Another South Carolina electric company called SCE&G has dried out its coal ash and trucked it to lined landfills where it won't leak into the Wateree River. But Santee Cooper found it was cheaper to reuse the ash than to dump it. So the best use of this coal ash isn't to dump it back in the ground, even if it is a lined landfill, but to use it as a building block for cement.
Right now we're using about 80% of the material.
Make no mistake, it still costs the ratepayers to get rid of the coal ash, and it's not quick or cheap.
It's about $250 million over the next 10 to 15 years.
Duke has more than 10 times the volume of coal ash Santee Cooper does. Drying it out and removing the threat of pollution to lakes and rivers is expected to cost more than $1 billion. But Santee Cooper has shown a utility can cut much of that cost by reusing its coal ash and not just burying it. And get this, concrete makers in North Carolina have to import coal ash from South Carolina, even though there's 100 million tons of it in the ground right here. That story in a moment. In the coal ash controversy, one great irony is that while Duke is trying to get rid of coal ash, concrete makers say they can't get enough of it. While North Carolina tries to figure out what to do with 100 million tons of coal ash, one industry can't get enough of the stuff.
We want it, and we need it. We just can't get it.
Henry Batten's president of Concrete Supply Company in Charlotte.
The sand, the stone, put it all together, and that's what batches and makes concrete.
A key ingredient in concrete, coal ash, especially the fine ash called fly ash.
The Duke Energy building has fly ash in it, has a lot of fly ash in it.
The great irony is the North Carolina concrete industry has to import coal ash from South Carolina when it has an abundance right here.
And that's insane.
And in South Carolina, near Columbia and Charleston, they're already doing it.
It's happening in South Carolina, where they can take those ponds and reclaim them, put them back to their natural state, and are taking that ash, refining it, reprocessing it, and selling it to me.
But the ash can't come straight out of a coal ash pond and into concrete. First, it has to be refined. And North Carolina's not doing enough of that.
I'd love to see North Carolina export ash.
And with the right engineering, it's a possible solution to the coal ash problem.
Man, I think we can do it.
Engineers tell us that part of the problem is not all the coal ash is the same quality, so some of it's not useful for concrete. So there's not one magic answer. We want to hear what you think. Stay in touch with us through Facebook, Twitter, and email. Thanks for joining us. Have a great Sunday.